So a video on the male reproductive system. So in men, the primary sex organs, the gonads, are the testes. Just they're the equivalent to the ovaries in the female. They produce the gametes and they secrete hormones the same way as the gonads of the women do. But the hormones for men are called androgens, the most important one being testosterone. The accessory organs are the various glands that secrete the components of the semen, and the accessory reproductive organs, which is really the penis, the external genitalia. So the hormones, the testosterone, is involved with the development of the reproductive organs. Plus, it's anabolic in a large way for a lot of the other tissues in the body, and it creates sexual behavior and libido. So, the testes, unlike the ovaries, are outside of the peritoneal cavity, outside of the abdomen or the space where the rest of the organs are, and they're located within the scrotum. And their main job is to produce sperm and testosterone. And then there's a series of ducts that take the sperm from its production in the testes up into the abdomen and then out in the penis. The sperm has no cytoplasm, so there are secretions that nourish the sperm on its journey, provide the mitochondria with carbohydrates so that it can produce ATP so that they can swim. The accessory sex glands are the seminal vesicles, the prostate, the bulbourethral glands, and these secretions all become part of the semen. So it's located like this. It surprises most people to realize that the testes and the scrotum are actually found forward of the penis. The testes is here. The vas deferens passes here in front of and over the top of the pubic bone. It passes back over the top of the bladder, and right here, so this is the tube that's for sperm. Right here there's something called the ampulla, and the sperm kind of sits here. This gland here is the seminal vesicle, and it produces a fluid that mixes with the sperm here to start to make semen. This duct here that leads up to the urethra, there's two of them, one on each side, are called the ejaculatory ducts. Right here, just below the bladder, surrounding the urethra, is the prostate. The prostate gland makes more secretions that add to the ejaculate, to the semen. This part of the urethra that's in the prostate is called the prostatic urethra. This part of the urethra, this short bit of the urethra that's found in the muscles of the floor of the pelvis, is called the membranous urethra. And the last part of the urethra that passes along the length of the penis is called the spongy urethra. The penis starts back here, very close to the ischial tuberosities, and comes forward here. We'll talk about it more in a different slide. So the scrotum is where the where we find the testes. It's a little sac of skin and some fascia. It's significantly cooler than the core body temperature, and that's because to produce sperm, the testes have to be cooler than body temperature. So really the scrotum is all about temperature regulation. The temperature just has to be this 3 degrees cooler. So there's a couple of muscles that are involved with this. One is called the dartos. It takes darts in the scrotum. It's circular, so it causes wrinkles, and it pulls the testes in close. There's another one that it's called the cremaster. It actually pulls the testes up close to the body, so it retracts it. So when both these muscles are relaxed, the scrotum hangs lower and cooler. When it's cold out, these muscles tighten and they pull the testes up close to the body and close to each other and retain more heat. So it's like that in cool weather. The two testes are here, and you can see the cremaster muscle here surrounding the whole thing, and it will pull the testes up. The dartos muscle is not easily seen in here, but it surrounds here in the skin of the scrotum, in the fascia, really. So each testes has a couple of tunics around it, a couple of layers of tissue around it. One of them is called the tunica vaginalis. The word vagina actually means pocket. So this is a pocket of tissue, a pocket of peritoneum that extends out into the scrotum. So the testes sits in this pocket of peritoneum. The testes itself is surrounded by a dense, irregular connective tissue called the tunica albuginea. Albuginea means white. It's very tough connective tissue. The testes is divided into a whole bunch of little lobules by connective tissue septa. And each lobule, and there's 250, 300 lobules in each testes, and each lobule has 1 to 4 seminiferous tubules. And it's right in the seminiferous tubules, it's in these tubules that sperm production happens. So the sperm are made by meiosis in the seminiferous tubules, and when they're released from the walls of the seminiferous tubules, they migrate into what's called the tubulus rectus, and then the reti testi. And both of these, rectus and reti, mean straight. So these are straight ducts. The seminiferous tubules are very coiled ducts. And then they leave the reti testi through the efferent ductules, and they go into this area called the epididymis. And the epididymis stores sperm, and then the sperm mature there. There is a rich blood supply to the testes. This is very highly metabolically active. So the blood supply comes from the testicular arteries and returns by the testicular veins, and all of this is found along with the some lymphatic vessels, and the vas deferens in something called the spermatic cord. And that spermatic cord is all surrounded by the cremaster muscle. So when we look at it, it looks very much like this. So this is the tunica albuginea here, surrounding the testi. This is the tunica vaginalis here and here. There's like a visceral and a peritoneal, or the parietal portion of it. And there's a space in between, and it's filled with fluid. The septa are here. These are the seminiferous tubules in each lobule. The ready testi is here. This is the epididymis here. And this is readily palpable on a testi. It's also interesting that there is a very efficient heat exchange that happens here. Blood coming down the artery, the testicular artery here, is warmer than the testi. And so you don't want the blood actually heating the testi up, because the idea is that it has to be cool. And then the blood returning via the veins is cool. So the veins form this network, this plexus that surrounds the artery, and it's really a heat exchange. What happens is that the arterial blood warms the venous blood back up to core body temperature before it returns to the body, and giving that heat to the venous blood actually cools the arterial blood a little bit. So it's a very efficient method. Now, it's right about this point, as the ductwork leaves the testi and enters the spermatic cord, that it changes names to the ductus deferens or the vas deferens. Vas means vessel. Now, there are other cells in the testi that surround the seminiferous tubules, and they're called the interstitial cells, or the cells of Leydig, and they produce the testosterone, the androgen hormones. So when we look at it, we'll see that the tubule is here. This is a tubular cell. This is a seminiferous tubule. The lumen here, you can see the little spermatids being formed 4 at a time in through here. This is another seminiferous tubule here, and there's a third one here, there's a fourth one over here, there's a fifth one around here. These cells in between are the interstitial cells, and they're involved with making hormones. The penis is the copulatory organ. It's the instrument that's used to deposit sperm in the female vagina. So there's a couple of parts to it. There's a root that is basically buried in the body wall. There's a shaft that extends forward. There's a foreskin that covers the glans. The end of the penis is a glans, and there on either side, anchoring it, are 2 crura. It's singular as crus. It means leg, and it's attached to muscles, the ischio-cavernous muscle, and that kind of allow it to move. Now, it's made up of this spongy tissue. It's primarily made up of spongy tissue, and there's 3 tubes of this, cylindrical bodies of this spongy erectile tissue. There's one called the corpus spongiosum that is surrounding the urethra and forms the glans of the penis. The On the dorsum of the penis, on either side, there's a paired called the corpus cavernosa. Now, erection happens when this fills with blood, when there's more blood entering these three spongy tissues than leaving. The penis becomes flaccid when more blood leaves, so it's basically fills up with blood. So this is actually looking superiorly. So this would be a section for, kind of between the legs, looking up at it. So there's the bladder. The vas deferens comes over, and then this is the underside of the bladder here. This is the prostate. Vas deferens, ampulla, ejaculatory duct, seminal vesicle, the prostatic urethra, the membranous urethra, the spongy urethra. There's the corpus spongiosum is here, surrounding the urethra. This is the bulb. This is the crus, left and right, and these are the corpus cavernosa. In cross section, it looks like this. There are arteries up the middle of each of the corpus cavernosa. The spongy urethra, or the spongy tissue, is the corpus spongiosum, surrounds the urethra here. There are veins, arteries, and nerves all on the dorsum of the penis here. I've already talked about epididymis and the vas deferens, the ejaculatory duct, the urethra. So the epididymis really is kind of the storage spot. After the sperms are produced, and we'll talk about that in a minute, what happens here is that the epididymis secretes nutrients and keep the sperm healthy. At this point, the sperm don't swim; their flagella don't work. And they are just pushed further up the vas deferens by pressure of the new sperm being made in the testes, and by the secretions of the fluids by these ducts. During ejaculation, there is a contraction here, and it pushes sperm up the vas deferens. So the vas deferens passes up in front of the pubic bone and enters the abdomen in the inguinal canal. So it's right below the inguinal ligament. This is a bit of a design flaw, because this is where inguinal hernias happen, at the hole that has to be there. It passes over the bladder, and then on the underside it expands and forms the ampulla. And the ampulla is kind of like a launching area. So that's the sperm are loaded in the chamber there. The seminal vesicle joins there, and it becomes the ejaculatory duct. There's peristalsis happens in this vas deferens. This is where where vasectomies happen. So the urethra like I said, has the three parts: the prostatic, membranous, and spongy urethra, and it's used for sperm in the reproductive system, and it's used for urine in the urinary system. Again, we've seen this picture before. So, the seminal vesicles, I've mentioned them a few times. They actually produce 70% of the semen. When a man has a vasectomy, the only thing that's missing is the sperm. The vast majority of the ejaculate is still the same. It's because most of the ejaculate is from the seminal vesicles and the prostate. So it's a very alkaline fluid that the seminal vesicle makes because it has to combat the acidity of the vagina. So it neutralizes. There's fructose and ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C, and a coagulating enzyme and prostaglandins in it. And the reason that there's these things is that the fructose provides the carbohydrates that the mitochondria in the sperm need to produce ATP to run their flagella. Ascorbic acid is to prevent oxidization. Like I say, it's vitamin C. The coagulating enzyme is so that it basically clumps up and doesn't run out of the vagina right after sex. It gets sticky and becomes less liquid at that point. And the prostaglandins is actually to cause a little bit of inflammation of the woman's cervix so that the mucus plug in the cervix gets watered down a little bit and becomes a little less viscous. And so the products of this, and it's 70% of the volume of semen, mixes with the sperm at the ejaculatory duct. Now, the prostate surrounds the urethra and the ejaculatory ducts, and it secretes a milky-colored fluid. It says it's slightly acidic. It's more neutral, I think, than anything. It has citrate, which is, again, for the citric acid cycle. It's for making ATP in Krebs cycle. There are various enzymes in there. There's some antigens, PSA. It's an important one for diagnosis of prostatic problems. And it basically activates the sperm. When the secretions of the prostate mix in, and it's basically about 25% of the ejaculate, it gets the sperm really starting to swim. It starts the flagellas really going. So it's more of an activation sort of thing. Now, there's a couple of other glands that are found at the bulb of the penis, right at the base of the penis of the corpus spongiosum. And there's these two little glands, and they're basically the same as the two glands that secrete in the vaginal vestibule for lubrication. These two little glands produce a thick, clear mucus. It's the clear secretions that usually come out the end of the penis when the guy is excited, but before ejaculation. And it does a couple of things. One of the things it does is it produces lubrication, and it also cleans the urethra out of any urine that is still in there. It neutralizes it because urine is not compatible with sperm. So this kind of sets the stage. So these glands start secreting this mucus at about the time that erection starts. So they're located right here and here. So so semen is the mixture of all of these secretions. And so it's the nutrients, and activation of the sperm, the prostaglandins, all of that stuff. Now, it's interesting, when a man has had a vasectomy, it doesn't change really significantly the volume of the semen, and the only thing that's missing from the semen is the sperm itself, the little gametes. And it's also interesting that it doesn't affect the cells of Leydig, so it doesn't affect testosterone levels at all. So libido is the same, and ejaculation is the same. Orgasm is exactly the same. The only thing that's missing is the gametes. So it really is a very effective form of birth control. There's also a few antibiotic chemicals, and all the semen. So, in order for all of this to work, for copulation to happen, there needs to be an erection. And so what happens is the erectile tissue, the corpus spongiosum and the two corpus cavernosa, engorge with blood, and the penis gets stiff. It is initiated by a myriad of stimuli, erotic things. It can be induced or inhibited by emotions, higher mental activity, fantasizing. Stress makes it difficult for it to happen, performance anxiety, things like that. Erection is a parasympathetic response, and the parasympathetics cause the release of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator. Erectile tissue fills with blood, and then as the corpus cavernosa fill with blood, then it actually pinches the veins that drain the penis, and so it compromises the venous drainage, so the pressure builds up, and you end up with you end up with an erection. Now, when the corpus spongiosum is filled and engorged, the glands gets big, and and it holds the urethra open, so facilitates the passage of the semen. Impotence is when you can't attain that erection. Now, there are physiological reasons for impotence. They tend to be vascular, things like diabetes, long-term smoking. Vascular disorders will lead to physiological impotence. There's also psychological impotence, that it's more emotionally based. So erection is a parasympathetic response, but orgasm and ejaculation is a sympathetic response. It's a spinal reflex to do with the sympathetic, and really this is propulsion of the semen right from the ampulla and the contents of the various glands all mixing, and a kind of a peristalsis that that pushes all of this forward. There are some muscles, some skeletal muscles. One of them is called the bulbospongiosus muscle, and you get a rapid series of contractions. And it's very analogous to the contractions that women feel in the walls of their vagina at the equivalent time. I was going to say at the same time, but at the equivalent time. Now, men also have to constrict a sphincter in the bladder so that semen doesn't go up into the bladder, and so that urine doesn't leave the bladder and mix with the semen. So the sphincter at the bladder at the front of the trigone gets very tight. So I'm just briefly going to touch on spermatogenesis. So it really involves meiosis, and I talked about meiosis in class when we talked about mitosis. So just to remind you, that most of our body cells have got 23 pairs of chromosomes, so there's 46. Our diploid number is 46. Our haploid number is 23. Sperm and oocytes all have 23 chromosomes. All the gametes have 23 chromosomes. It's the haploid number. And so meiosis happens the exact same way as it does in making ova, except that the difference, and you can follow through this if you want. Like I said, I did it in class with pipe cleaners, and this compares the meiosis and mitosis. Meiosis being here. So mitosis, you start out with one diploid and you end up with two diploid. In meiosis, you start with one diploid and you end up with 4 haploid nuclei. In oogenesis, 3 of these nuclei become polar bodies and 1 becomes the expelled oocyte, which becomes the ova. In spermatogenesis, we get 4 sperm out of it. So we need both mitosis for the stem cells and then meiosis to make the spermatids. Now, this is a photomicrograph of a cross-section of a seminiferous tubule, and these are the new sperm cells in the center, in the lumen here. It basically starts like this. There's a sperm cell, undergoes mitosis, then that cell undergoes meiosis and splits, and then becomes these late spermatids that have grown flagella, but you'll notice that the cytoplasm is all joined together, and then they're released, and they basically lose their cytoplasm. Please don't memorize the stages, but really the stages correspond to what's happening in meiosis. They're called spermatids when they become haploid. When they're still diploid, they're spermatocytes. So unlike women, sperm production starts at puberty, and it continues through life. I'm not going to worry about the different types of spermatogonia and such, and these are all the stages. So when we look at the sperm, there's a head, a mid-piece, and the tail, which is the flagellum. So the head has got the nucleus and an acrosome that has enzymes that allow it to get into the ova. There's a mitochondria that propels the flagella, so it ends up looking like that. Um, the tubes have got these sustentacular cells that maintain. Sustentacular means to sustain. And again, we're not going to get too much into it, but basically they are secreting the nutrients that keep these things alive. So in the man, our hormones really are not cyclical, but there is a hormonal regulatory event, and it involves the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the testes. So we call it the HPG axis, which is hypothalamus pituitary gonad. So what happens is the hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is the same one that women have. It's secreted at different times under different stimuli, just meeting a novel potential sex partner will cause the release of this. The releasing hormone stimulates FSH and LH in the pituitary. The FSH causes the sustentacular cells to release androgen binding proteins. So that means that testosterone causes the spermatogenic cell to be receptive. The LH stimulates the interstitial cells, the Leydig cells, to release testosterone. The testosterone binds with the proteins, the androgen binding proteins, and then spermatogenesis happens, and then when the testosterone levels are high enough, there's a feedback that shuts the hypothalamus down, and there's less FSH and LH being released, and the whole thing slows down. Inhibin is a hormone is released when the sperm count is too high, and so it shuts it off. So this is a diagram of that. So what does testosterone do for us? It's made from cholesterol because it's a steroid hormone, and it has effect on any target cells that have receptors. Now, in the brain, it gets transformed into an estrogen. But for the most part, it stays testosterone. So its main effect is to prompt spermatogenesis. All the accessory organs are targeted by it, so it's what causes the penis to enlarge and become its adult size. If there's a testosterone deficiency, then you have atrophy. It also causes the seminal vesicles and the prostate to enlarge. It's one of the reasons why if somebody has prostatic hypertrophy, then they block testosterone to help deal with it. It's the basis of the sex drive. It's anabolic. It leads to the secondary male characteristics. So facial hair, hair all over the body, deepening of the voice, thickening skin, density in bones, increase in skeletal muscle.